Good day everyone, Abyss full of goats here, and let's welcome back scripted content to this channel. Due to my new job, I've been able to do much in regards to recording over the last couple of months. Have another one settled in, I'm ready to start up again. For our first time back, we're going to do a top 10 list, and what better topic than my favourite monsters of all time, the Monarchs. For those who don't know, the Monarchs are a series of 1 and 2 tribute monsters of various types, who get powerful effects when tribute summoned. Having ruled the game in 2006 and 2007, before being reimagined in the 2010s, Monarchs are one of the longest lasting top decks in Yu-Gi-Oh history, and my second favourite deck of all time next to Burning Abyss. As I said in my GOAT guide on the deck, Monarch was one of the first competitive decks I ever put together, having pulled an Ultimate Rare Mobius back in the day. 2007 with Perfect Circle Monarch was the highlight of my first Yu-Gi-Oh phase, and the Emperor of Darkness structure deck is what brought me back to the game years later. So today I'm going to take a look at my royal friends and rank the best of the best. This is the top 10 Monarchs in Yu-Gi-Oh history. Now when watching this list, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. Firstly, that this is only ranking the Monarchs themselves, not the archetype as a whole, so you won't see cards like Pantheism or Stormforth on this list, but they may get their own one day. And secondly, like any video I do where I talk about cards in different areas in the game, because I'm judging these cards not just on how good they are today, but also on the impact they made on their own time period. This means that some older cards that are technically weaker will be ranked higher than some newer cards that are technically stronger. And with that being said, let's begin. Beginning this list, we are actually looking at the second iteration of the Monarchs from the mid-2010s, known as the Mega Monarchs. Now the Mega Monarchs were intended to be powered-up versions of the original 6 Monarchs, each with an improved version of the original's effect, at the cost of requiring an extra tribute, a cost that could be circumvented by sacrificing one tribute-summoned monster. In addition to this, the card would gain a bonus ability if the tribute summon involved a monster of the same type, with the obvious idea being to tribute one of the original Monarchs for its superpowered version. Unfortunately, when these cards were first released, the game's speed was beginning to pick up at an insane rate around the same time, and tribute summoning a level 8 monster was nowhere near enough to keep up with the meta. So for a while the Mega Monarchs faded into obscurity, until a few decks a couple of years later came about that would make use of a select few of them, the first of which being ZABORG the Mega Monarch. The upgraded version of the Light Monarch, ZABORG, like his counterpart, had the ability to pop a monster upon summon. Now this is already a decent effect as it's simple and straightforward removal, however we rarely actually use this effect on our opponent's cards due to the card's second effect. That's because if the monster that destroyed is a light, both players must send from their extra deck to the graveyard cards equal to the level of the monster destroyed. As such, 9 times out of 10 we'll be popping ZABORG himself and taking 8 cards out of our opponent's extra deck. Also finally, if ZABORG was summoned by tribute a light monster, you get to select the cards sent from your opponent's extra deck to the graveyard. These last two effects are obviously bonkers, however the symmetrical nature of this effect meant only a select few decks could play it, as most decks couldn't justify losing 8 cards from their extra deck. The card first saw play in a few Necros decks, as it was another way for the deck to attack the extra deck along with cards like Unicorn, and it was also gave the deck another way to dump Herald of Arclight for its ability to add a ritual card from deck to hand, because apparently Necros wasn't consistent enough already. The card also saw some play in extra deck form of Monarchs in 2016 as a way of locking down the opponent's extra deck without domain, and has seen a few rogue brews based around the ZABORG himself since then, but otherwise he's seen only fringe play throughout most of his existence. As such he can't be ranked higher, but he's still in the number 10 spot on this list. Up next we move on to the card that first started my love affair with the Monarchs in the first place, Mobius the Frost Monarch. Like most of the Monarchs from the GOAT era, Mobius is a level 6 tribute monster that upon being summoned can destroy up to 2 spells or traps on the field. Now in an era where backward removal was limited to Heavy Storm, MST and Dust Tornado, with the first 2 being at 1 at the time, it's no surprise many decks looking for more ways to outpower powerful traps like Mirror Force and Sakuretsu Armor. As such, in addition to seeing play in many Monarch lists at the time, Mobius also saw play in various decks as a sideboard option versus back row heavy decks. Mobius saw a fair amount of play in GOAT era Monarchs, as in control allows it to gain field advantage, whereas in aggro builds it clears the way for direct attacks. However, it really started to see play in Reaper format with the rise of Stein Monarchs, which combines the traditional Monarch strategy with Cyberstein that usually brought us something like Cyber Twin Dragon, and Mobius was often used to clear the way for an easy OTK. I will admit there's some nostalgia bias here, but Mobius in my opinion definitely deserves his place at number 9 on this list. Staying in 2005, we move on to ZABORG the Thunder Monarch. The only level 5 monarch of the original 4, ZABORG has the effect that upon summon it destroys one monster on the field. Now before discussing the positives of this card, I'd like to mention the one downside that kept him from a higher spot on this list. Unlike every other monarch, ZABORG on summon effect is not optional, meaning that sometimes this card will either pop one of your own monsters or be stuck in your hand without a good target. However, what still skews my spot on this list is that situations like that in old school Yu-Gi-Oh will not occur often, and ZABORG will often be an excellent way to remove a problematic monster. What makes him so great in GOAT format is that he's the deck's best answer to BLS, a card that dominates GOAT format and is very hard to out. Basically, for those unaware in GOAT, if you can't deal with BLS, you likely aren't winning or you're playing something like Burn, so having an out to the only heavily played monster we can't beat in battle is amazing. Also on the flip side of this, ZABORG being a light monster also means that playing him in Monarch allows us to splash BLS, as the deck will have another light other than Magician of Faith. Having BLS and a Monarch on board in GOAT can often be game over for an opponent, especially if it's something like Grand Mag or Mobius or ZABORG himself for a way to clear the board for a big attack. So for being GOAT Monarch's best answer to BLS and for giving them access to BLS in themselves, ZABORG makes it to number 8 on this list. Next up, closing the GOAT format trio of entries, we have what may well be the king of the monarchs in the format, the Stalos the Firestorm Monarch. Obviously the fire monster of the archetype, the Stalos upon normal summon can take a card out of the opponent's hand. If it's a monster, this card deals damage equal to that monster's level times 100 to the opponent. Now while it's true that Mobius and ZABORG are more explosive and can have a larger impact on the board than the Stalos, what puts him higher than those two is the consistency of which you can use his effect. You see, what makes Monarchs a powerful deck in the early years of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the amount of advantage a player could gain from them. Already usually a +1 in terms of card advantage, they became truly a threat when you could tribute an opponent's card for the summon, as in this case you're only down one card, where your opponent will be down at the minimum of 2, and possibly 3 if we hit 2 with Mobius. The problem is you won't always have 2 backward pop with Mobius, or a monster removers of ZABORG and Grand Mag, meaning that you wouldn't get the maximum value from playing them always. Their Stalos on the other hand will almost always have a target for his effect, as unless it's very late game, most GOAT players will always have cards in hand to discard due to the conservative nature of the format. This makes the Stalos good in both standard GOAT control monarchs and the more aggressive builds, as in the control builds, removing one card from an opponent's hand means they'll be going to be down on resources for the grind game, and in more aggressive builds, in addition to this, the bird will make it easier to quickly do 8,000 points of damage before they can lose to the control decks. For its consistency, versatility and usefulness, I believe the Stalos is the strongest GOAT era monarch and easily deserving of the number 7 spot on this list. Going forward a little in time, we fast forward through the era of GOAT format, and once the major players in that format like BLS, Thousand Eyes and the Trinity were finally banned out of the game, Monarchs became one of, if not the, top deck in the format, thanks to Treeborn Frog being a constant source of tribute fodder, and a new Monarch we'll see later in this list. A few bannings and one of the most powerful sets ever later, however, and many thought the Monarch's reign was finally over. However, as seen by all the support the deck's gotten over the years, Konami weren't ready to let this deck die just yet, and released the Dark Emperor structure deck, and along with it, CAIUS the Shadow Monarch. The dark monster of the Monarch family, CAIUS had the ability to banish one card on the field. While this may not sound like much today, the fact that this card not only banishes its target, but that there are no restrictions in regards to the type of card it can banish, or the position that card has to be in, which only one other Monarch had at the time, made it an extreme power creep for Monarchs when compared to the likes of ZABORG and Mobius, only being able to hit certain cards in certain positions. In addition to this, if the card CAIUS banished was a dark attribute monster, it dealt 1000 points of damage to the opponent, meaning this card was also an excellent option in the late game, or going into time, often even doing more damage than the Stalos, the Monarch designed for burn. Unfortunately, when this card was released, Dark Arm Dragon was beginning its reign of terror, which combined with Treeborn Frog going to 1, meant Monarch wasn't really a thing at this time. However, due to its typing and power, CAIUS found himself slotted into several DAD variants as a form of interaction, and also found a slot in anti-meta banished decks focused on D-Fisher, Macrocosmos, and the DD monsters. However, as much as things change, others stay the same, as once the dad decks began to see nerfs, we saw the return of monarchs with CAIUS at the helm, in both anti-meta monarchs with Prime Material Dragon and Gravekeeper variants as well. CAIUS's final and arguably greatest success came in Edison format, in the form of Frognax, a monarch deck that used the now at 2 Treeborn Frog, along with Roaring Toad and Swap Frog for insane card advantage. Like Warsworn Tribute Monarchs, CAIUS has long past his prime, but his longevity, increase in monarch power level, and playability have earned him this high spot on this list. Up next we have an interesting case of an old school monarch with old school stats that wasn't relevant until the modern era of the deck. Karaz first saw print in the Light of Destruction Special Edition, but aside from a couple of decks in 2009 testing him out, it took over half a decade and 2 waves of monarch support for this card to see consistent play. Upon being tribute summoned, Karaz has the ability to pop any 2 cards in the field, and for each card destroyed, the card's controller draws a card. Now if Karaz only got the first effect, he'd be the most powerful monarch of his time, even better than CAIUS and RAIZA. However, that second effect means that Karaz is less of a destruction card and more of a draw engine. There is rarely a time in Yugioh where giving your opponent a pot of greed is justified, so more often than not, we'll be using this effect to pop our own cards, and then draw 2 cards. This is the main reason Karaz didn't gain much traction for years, as Monarchs decks didn't play enough cards they wanted in the graveyard in the early days. That all changed with the introduction of the Prime Monarch and the Squires in the 2010s. Suddenly the Monarchs had a way to get field presence early and a card they really wanted in the grave, and Karaz finally found his place in both extra and domain variants of Monarchs, allowing for insane card draw, graveyard setup for future turns, and a light tribute monster to be used for Mega ZABORG and 8th of the Heavenly Monarch. A staple of Monarch since the Emperor of Darkness structure deck, Karaz's usefulness in the deck peaked in 2017 when Link format first began. This wasn't due to the new Link monsters, but more thanks to a card that Link format made people aware of, Go Through the Vague Shadow. A Blackwing card, go with the ability to summon itself from your hand if you had no monsters. In addition to this, upon summon it brought 2 tokens along with it. Now this is also used primarily in Link decks for spamming, however this card also had use as a 1-card Karaz summon and draw 2 in Monarchs, and was also another Dark in the deck for Allure of Darkness. This card is now banned, but Karaz still sees a lot of play in Monarchs, as drawing 2 cards will never be bad, particularly in the slower game state that Domain Monarchs creates. A clear example that any card can become good over time, with the right support, Karaz has definitely earned his high spot on this list. At number 4 we have the King of the Penguins himself, RAIZA the Mega Monarch. Like most of the Mega Monarchs, RAIZA is an upgraded version of an original Monarch that requires tributing a tribute monster or 2 non-tribute monsters, as well as if you tribute a monster of the same type you get a bonus effect. Also, like most Megas, it's only a 0 amount of play for years after its release. In fact, if I made this list around a year ago or so, this card would most likely not have been on the list at all. That was until CAIUS decided to make one of the most powerful non-special summon decks ever made, since ironically Monarchs in Fluonderies. The Fluonderies archetype focuses on normal summoning and searching several wind monsters per turn, including a few monsters that can search any wind card, not just cards from their own archetype. As such, the deck can set up its boss monster, a floodgate for special summon monsters, and the wind barrier statue on their own turn, and using their trap card they can then sick RAIZA on their opponent during their turn once they've established whatever board they can through the floodgates. This is done because on Tribute Summon, RAIZA can spin a card on the field and to either player's graveyard to the top of their deck, and if Tribute Summoned using a wind, which will always be the case in Flu, you can then bounce any card on the field back to the owner's hand. In a deck like Flu, they can set up several floodgates. Spinning back wherever the opponent does make back to the top of their deck can be back-breaking, as often the opponent will have no cards left or any good draws to follow up on. In addition to this, with the extra bounce effect, RAIZA can bounce itself back to your own hand, creating a soft lock of sorts, as you can turn after turn, spin cards and lock the opponent out of the game. While Flu is not that prominent in the meta at present due to the overwhelming power of Tier, the fact that a Monarch can see competitive play in 2022 shoots RAIZA at number 4 on this list. Now I'm sure many of you are confused on why the original RAIZA is ranked higher on this list than his Mega counterpart. After all, isn't Mega RAIZA just a much better version of this card, like all the Mega Monarchs are? Well yes, in a vacuum that is true, but there's one major reason that original RAIZA is here above his newer counterpart. While the Mega version has seen meta relevance in recent years, the truth is that Flu is basically currently just an anti-meta deck that hasn't taken much of a percentage of top spots in major events. By contrast, the original RAIZA, if you'll pardon the pun, took the game by storm in 2007 and propelled Monarchs to Tier 1 status. As I said in the CAIUS entry, Monarchs began taking over Yugioh post-GOAT with the release of Tree-Born Frog to give the deck a massive boost in tribute ability. However, two things would change in late 06 and early 07 to solidify Monarchs as by far away the best deck. First, ironically, was new hero support in Elemental Hero Stratos, Destiny Hero Malicious, and Destiny Hero Disc Commander, which we'll get to in a second, and the second was our man here, RAIZA. The Wind Monarch, RAIZA had the effect of spinning one card on the field back to the top of the owner's deck. Like CAIUS, yeah, I know I'm comparing these two a lot, but there's a lot of similarities here. RAIZA was a major power creep in Monarchs, as it could remove any target on the field, and in this case it could be argued it was as good as CAIUS, because while the card's controller would see that card again, RAIZA would essentially lock them out of their next draw phase. Now by itself this would already be a very powerful effect, however when combined with 3 copies of the card Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, it meant that Monarch decks could lock the opponent out of several good draws, which could be enough to secure the game in a format as grindy as Perfect Circle. Speaking of which, what truly helped rise RAIZA up to the top tier in 2007 was the hero engine I mentioned earlier, along with Light and Darkness Dragon, making an absolute beast of a deck known as Perfect Circle Monarchs, a deck that could spit out big tribute monsters and synchros while constantly recycling cards like Disc Commander and Malicious to draw cards and keep field presence. This was the best deck throughout most of 2007, and it's arguably the best version of Monarchs ever made. Like CAIUS, RAIZA would go on to see play in 2009 in Edison Monarchs, before seeing his final hurrah all the way in 2014 in a Burning Abyss-less side deck piloted by Jeff Jones. For taking Monarchs to the highest height of Yu-Gi-Oh!, RAIZA more than earns the number 3 spot on this list. So now we get to the big guns, the 2 best Monarchs in the game's history, and no surprise here we're looking at the 2 new Monarchs that came from the Emperor of Darkness structure deck, the product that gave the archetype the support needed to become a tier 1 deck all over again in 2016. We'll talk about the other support cards somewhere down the line, but for now let's look at the 2 new Monarchs of essentially heaven and hell that we got, starting with Erebus the Underworld Monarch. Showing the Mega Monarch stats, Erebus and his counterpart Aether got a severe boost over their Mega predecessors from the support in the structure deck. A 2 tribute monster, Erebus upon summon allows us to dump 2 Monarch spells and traps to the graveyard, and then shuffle a card on the field, graveyard, or from the opponent's hand into the deck. Also, while in the graveyard, Erebus allows its controller to discard 1 Monarch spell or trap and target any monster with Monarch stats in the grave and add it back to the hand. So firstly, dumping 2 Monarch spells and traps to the grave gives major advantage in modern Monarchs, as well as likely dumping Pantheism of the Monarchs to search other Monarch cards, and the Prime Monarch, a trap monster we can summon from grave during either player's turn that has a solid wall, a good tribute material, and in the extra deck variant of the deck, also a good level 5 for rank 5 plays, link plays, and Zolkeen plays. Next, the on-summon effect is both powerful and versatile, making Erebus a good play going either first or second in this deck. Going first, you can rip a card out of the opponent's hand, giving them less resources on their turn, while going second, you can remove the opponent's biggest threat in a way that's hard to come back from. In addition to this, the floating effect upon death gives Monarch a comeback option in the later game, should the field get wiped, something the deck desperately needed at the time to keep up with the more modern decks. Finally, something incidental that makes Erebus even better today than he was upon release is the fact that he is a zombie monster. Why does that matter, you ask? Because increasingly lately it seems a powerful side deck option is Zombie World plus Necro World Banshee. Designed to lock out many extra decks that rely on the same monster type, Zombie World also prevents the tribute summon of non-zombie monsters, making it a great anti-Monarch card that Erebus can give us at least a fighting chance around. The only thing that keeps Erebus at the number 2 spot is that he can't be tribute summoned on the opponent's turn, meaning he's less versatile than the number 1 spot. Speaking of which, now to our number 1, and coming off her evil counterpart we have Aether the Heavenly Monarch. Like Erebus, Aether is a 2000 attack 2 tribute monster that can be summoned for 1 tribute by tributing another tributed monster. And like Erebus, she requires us to send 2 spells or traps from the deck to the grave for her effect, giving us advantage of Pantheism and Prime. However, her unique effect is what puts her above Erebus for the title of Best Monarch. Firstly, by sending the Monarch spells and traps to the grave, Aether can summon any Monarch from the deck, but is returned to the hand at the end of the turn. Not only does this give us the graveyard setup I mentioned before, and fodder for another ability we'll get into a second, but it also gives us more power on board going second, or potentially a follow-up play going first, by giving us another Monarch in hand at the end phase to resummon with the Prime Monarch we likely dumped off the cost. This means that in a slower game, Aether is by far our best bet in a grinding situation. But that isn't even the best part of Aether, no, that with the ability on the opponent's turn this card offers the Monarch strategy, essentially turning one of our deck's best spells in Stormforth into a piece of disruption. You see that by banishing a Monarch spell or trap from grave, Aether can be tribute summoned during the opponent's turn, which when you combine it with Stormforth being a quick play, makes this card a piece of disruption in addition to a powerful body and possible extender and extra deck variants of Monarchs. When the Emperor of Darkness structure deck was released in 2016, it immediately almost single-handedly brought Monarchs back into the meta, and their last two cards along with their corresponding squires were the main reason why, working around the archetype's limitations and allowing them to show off their strengths, and this resurgence will bring me back to the game after nearly half a decade. I hope one day in the future the Kami will give Monarchs more support, although with the likes of Flu and Draco now pretty much doing the same game plan but better, that seems unlikely. But even if they never get more support, I'll always love this archetype for getting me in and getting me back to the game. See you guys next time.